to today's talk by Professor Christopher E. Chapple, Loyola Marymount University of USA. This talk is being organized by the VIF as part of its program on civilizational studies. The subject of his talk is the shared heritage of yoga, ideas and practices from Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. He is a theologian and a practitioner of yoga. He is Doshi Professor of Indic and Comparative Theology at the university, and he's also Director of Master of Arts in Yoga Studies, Loyola Marymount University, Los Angeles, California. He is the founder and faculty advisor, Yoga Studies Center for Religion and Spirituality. Professor Chapple has wide experience in research and teaching. His teaching areas include religions of India, comparative religious ethics, religion and ecology, world religions, religions of the Near East, Buddhism, comparative mysticism, Sanskrit, American cultures, and yoga studies. He's knowledgeable. He knows many languages: Sanskrit, Tibetan, French, Spanish, German, and modern Greek. He is the author of several books, papers, and articles. The list is too long, but I'll just read out a few. He is the editor of Yoga in Jainism, which was published by Routledge, London in 2016. He is the co-editor of Engaged Emancipation, Mind, Morals, and Make-Believes. He is the co-author of a book called Sacred Thread, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. He is the co-author of In Praise of Mother Earth, the Prithvi Sukta of the Atharveda. He is editor-in-chief, World of Philosophy, A Harmony. He is also the editor of Yoga and Ecology, Dharma for the Earth. He has edited the Bhagavad Gita, which was the 25th anniversary edition. He is also the author of Yoga and the Luminous, Patanjali's Spiritual Path to Freedom. He is the associate editor of Religions, Encyclopedia of Religion and Nature. He has also co-edited Hinduism and Ecology, the intersection of earth, sky, and water. He has also authored Karma and Creativity. Actually, there are a long list which I don't want to read, but I read just a few of his works, the names, just to give you an idea of the breadth of his interests. And I think we need to study these subjects because it's the importance of International Yoga Day is that today yoga is being practiced all over the world. It's being realized that yoga is important for our daily lifestyles, for our well-being. Now, all the subjects that I mentioned are also, I think, very important, and they must come into the mainstream. So I think theology, it need not be just a narrow subject for studies. It should have applications to our daily lives, and I think that's the reason I read some of his works. Friends, you know, yoga traces its origin maybe to 5,000 years old Indian traditions. It talks about the transformation of mind, body, and soul through the harmony between the three. You know it very well that it's not a mere tool for physical exercise or for toning the body. It's an entire philosophy of keeping body, mind, and soul in harmony. And it facilitates overcoming the suffering or dukkha. In these days of COVID, the world is once again turning to yoga and pranayama to build immunity and resilience. I can't help but recall that the UN General Assembly on December 10, 2014 adopted an India-led resolution declaring 21st June as International Day of Yoga, recognizing that, and I quote, yoga provides a holistic approach to health and well-being, unquote. And through the resolution, incidentally, this resolution was adopted under the agenda of global health and foreign policy. So health and foreign policy were being linked through the medium of this resolution. And today, as we know, as we talk about, we are going through this massive COVID crisis. Global health has become such an important issue and also an issue for foreign policy. Coming back to the resolution, the 193-member General Assembly decided to proclaim 21st June as the International Day of Yoga. The resolution was introduced by none other than India's ambassador to UN at that time, Mr. Ambassador Ashok Mukherjee. And I hope he has joined us today. He is the distinguished fellow with us at the VIF. And the resolution attracted 175 nations as co-sponsors, the highest number ever for any General Assembly resolution of that time. The Prime Minister, in his address to UNGA, had said that yoga can help us deal with climate change, and I quote, "Yoga embodies unity of mind and body, thought and action, restraint and fulfillment, harmony between man and nature, a holistic approach to health and well-being." The advantages or the benefits to yoga were also recognized by none other than the UN Secretary General of the time, Ban Ki-moon, who said, "Yoga can contribute to resilience against non-communicable diseases and can bring communities together in an inclusive manner." The UNGA president of that time, Sam Kutesa, had said, "Yoga brings thought and action together in harmony while demonstrating a holistic approach to health and well-being." The resolution helps us every day we celebrate it, and it helps us to raise awareness of the benefits of practicing yoga. Friends, yoga is an ancient practice. It is being rediscovered all over the world once again. And today, Professor Chapple will share his insights on yoga as the shared heritage between Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. I'm sure what he has to tell us will throw new light on the practice and philosophy of yoga, which is very old, but which is also very contemporary, has contemporary relevance and great importance today. So I now request Professor Christopher Chapple to deliver his talk, and after his talk, we will have a Q&A, and then we will close the session by after about an hour or so. So may I request Professor Chapple to kindly make his remarks.
And it's early in the morning here. We have our coastal fog that comes in the morning and keeps us cool. So my heart goes out to you with all the warmth you're experiencing. And I'm hoping that all of you are keeping well. And I'm also having fond memories of the 4 months that my wife and I just recently lived in Haskas village. So I feel very much a resident of Delhi. And just as you're all undergoing a type of yoga of staying home, so also we're experiencing this through the United States and throughout the world. And what I want to do is work with history, divergence, convergence, and bring us up to around maybe 1,000 years ago before we reflect upon where we are now in the present. And I want to start with the importance of knowing place. And as we look at the earliest works of the Vedic and the Upanishadic traditions, the earliest works of the Jaina literature, as well as the works of early Buddhism from the Pali Canon, we see that there is, from the onset, an orientation of the human person within the cosmos. And I'll invoke those beautiful opening verses of the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, where we see this correlation between the horse that has been anointed for the process of sacrifice, and right in the beginning, an acknowledgement of the direction of the north, the direction of the south, the direction of the east, the rising sun, the direction of the west, and the notion that not only is the horse evocative, symbolic, representative of those places within the compass, but that so also we feel that directionality and that sense of place within our own human body. And from there, this text so elegantly lays out the architecture truly of yoga. And it speaks of seeing the correlation between the horse, the body of the horse, the positionality of the horse as inseparable from, and then it makes this sort of quantum leap to the hunger that is felt within the human person, the hunger that gives rise to creativity. And we know from the earlier Vedic passages, the hymn of creation, that it's from that heat of desire that creation comes forth. It's from that heat of desire that we go out to engage with our senses, to engage through our body with the activities of the world. And from these early themes, we see the distillation of a way of thought called Sankhya, accounting for all of the pieces of the universe, all of the building blocks of earth, water, fire, air, space, as well as the operations of the human body, and perhaps most importantly, the operations of the human mind. And by listing out the bhavas, by listing out the range of emotions that overwhelm the body, that energize the body, that define the body, that in their collectivity put together this reality called the linga, put together the reality of the samskaras, the vasanas that come to define the nature of our individual places of desire, are, we might call it, our vector that pulls us into the world in a particular way. Okay, this analysis of the human person places a great responsibility upon each and every individual. And the Sankhyakarika argues for multiple Purushas. There is not one singularity. Even within our own experience, we have so many aspects to our person. And we find ourselves in the midst of so many other people. And on the one hand, we find this marvelous capacity of the human being to connect, to be able to move from that silent witness consciousness into the realm of prakritic activity, into the realm of all that is to be smelt and tasted and seen and touched and heard. All of that clearly celebrated in the Upanishads as powered by the breath, is enabled by the breath. And then we get, I'm going to mix it up just a little bit here, We get this articulation by Gautama Buddha some 2,500 years ago, sarvam dukkam, that there is something troubling about being propelled forward by hatred, greed, and delusion, and something inseparable about the human condition from these qualities and conditions called kleshas. The kleshas in yoga, later articulated, avidya, asmita, raga, devesha, abhinavesha, that is an underlying fundamental misperception of our purpose in the world, an undying falling into the bad habit of egoism, the difficulty of always wanting to go for that next best thing, the difficulty of devesha, this negativity that, oh, this is not what I want. And then that beautiful one held even by the wise, that we have this unbroken desire to keep moving. For the Jains, very early period, they articulated this in light of 8 different sets of karma. The latter 4 sets being expressive of this just simple act of living, but the earlier 4 being obscuring karmas, akin to the hatred, greed, and delusion that propel the Buddhist wheel of samsara. So then, probably around 600, 700 BC, we find distinct articulations, and I'll give some of those distinctions. And we also find conversion. Okay, the distinctions. With the Vedas, with Vedic ceremony, we see this celebration of the possibility of joining life, the witness, the consciousness with lived experience through vehicles of auspiciousness facilitated by Vedic sacrifice, facilitated by what seem to be early practices from as old as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa of sitting in Padmasana or something akin to Padmasana, sitting in such a way that a harmony with nature emerges. And we see in that very early seal an image of someone who looks like a yogi, surrounded with all manner of wildlife, with trees, with tigers, with rhinoceroses, with deer. And in this very peaceful tableau, we get an idea of what might be possible, what might be the ideal, what might be the occupation of people who have taken this up as their best way of life. But these images, unfortunately, literally, as yet, do not fully speak to us, because the few letters that we have not been found in sufficient abundance to translate a language. So we're left with a little bit of conjecture until we find the voice of the Rig Veda itself that talks about the Vratyas. And the Vratyas are the people who take vows. And this becomes the defining feature of what it means to be a yogi. One of the defining features. And the vows, the Vratyas, are ways of engaging tapas, again, a very old Vedic world, a way of kindling this inner heat of desire in such a way that it becomes purified, in such a way as there is a no saying to hatred, greed, and delusion, of kindling a fire that will burn off the cloak of ignorance, of kindling a fire that will allow this relentless desire to go forward and create and to appropriate, to allow that to be held in abeyance. And this move does not happen automatically, but requires the exertion of an elevated form of human will. Now, the earliest delineation of these practices can be found in the rather renowned Vratya traditions that we associate more with Northeast India. And as we look at the geography, as we go back to what I opened with, the sense of emplacement, and we're talking as best we can through the course of time, through the course of history, we know that the Vedic sacrifices were associated with the northwest of India, with more the Indus, Saraswati, Ganga, Yamuna areas in the northwest. We know that to the northeast, to the areas as high as Nepal and the foothills of the Himalayas and extending down all the way to Benares and below, but to that northeast area, we find the birthplace of the Tirthankaras. I'm thinking the historical Tirthankara, Parshvanath, 800 BC, of Lord Gautama Buddha from about 500 BC, that in those areas we get the first clear articulation of what become known as the Mahavratas, the great vows. These are the foundation of yoga. These are the pillars upon which yoga becomes built, the pillars through which one enters and sustains yoga practice. And the earliest step-by-step instruction for these we receive from the Jain literature, and the oldest surviving literature of Jainism is the Acharanga Sutra, the limbs of comportment. I love that, achara. How do we carry ourselves? What is our carriage? And for this text, it begins first by looking outward and observing place, observing life that is found in the microscopic area of Earth. And we see that within the Earth are what are called nagoda, the building blocks of life itself, bacteria, viruses. And we see that the Earth herself takes so many forms: rocks, soil, hills, mountains, plains. And that in its immensity and in its literal granularity, it calls us to attention. Life is said to live in particles of earth for 23,000 years, the later literature tells us. And then we move to water. Life is to be found within water, even within our morning chai, as well as its life-giving properties, the life-giving properties of the earth that give us the plants that give us food, the life-giving properties of water, which we ingest and we integrate and allows our life to flow, and heat, that all-important heat. We think of the Gayatri Mantra, beloved universally through India, acknowledging the power of the rising sun, that heat that dwells outside us and that heat that gives us power within. Breath, wind, prana, celebrated in the Acharanga Sutra, to be observed in watching how the breeze moves to be observed and watching, so beautifully praised in the Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, how without breath we have no life. And then space. And we are all observing in this time of the coronavirus, we are observing the Digvrata, a very early Jain vow set forth thousands of years ago that says, take the vow of limiting your going here and there. Take the vow of staying home for a full day, for a full week. For now, many, many months, all of us through the globe on a retreat described as if by the Jains so many thousands of years ago. So acknowledging life, rules were given through observance of their efficacy, of how to minimize harm to life, our own life, how to minimize harm to the life that surrounds us and supports us. And those vows known to all, ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha. Okay, these vows, first articulated in detail in the Acharanga Sutra, advise us, do no violence to any being. Be gentle even as you walk upon the earth. Guard speech. Be careful with every single word created and delivered. Align your being with the trueness of reality. This was the vow of social analysis taken by Mahatma Gandhi. This is the vow of resisting coronavirus by acknowledging it, speaking its truth, learning its reality. And then the vow of asteya, wear the mask. Again, a very old Jain practice of wearing the mask to prevent harm from coming in and to prevent harm from going out. To violate that vow in public now is to rob the possibility of life from yourself and to potentially rob the possibility of life for others should you be infected. Then brahmacharya. To use that sacred, powerful energy of life, again, within vowed circumstance, within the vow of marriage, within the vow of, if one has chosen celibacy, for very, very few, the correct path, to hold to that vow and to emulate this state, whether as a married person or as a single person, wherein we fully feel the totality of the cosmos within this vowed relationship. And then finally, for the Buddhists, their fifth vow was no intoxicants. Intoxicants cloud the mind. Intoxicants make it very difficult to hold to the other four vows. And for the Jains, and I love this particular one, the fifth vow is a sustained reflection on how little we actually need to survive. And the monks and nuns from 2,500 years ago were encouraged to look at a tree and recall that this is the era of deforestation in India. Before 2500 BCE, India was forested from the edge of the desert all the way into Assam and beyond, and from the Himalayan foothills all the way to Kanyakumari, 1,000 miles, each direction, wooded with these magnificent specimens of lovely, lovely trees, life-giving, life-supporting, interactive. But as civilization marched forward, it resourced the tree. It took the tree for fire. It took the tree for houses. It took the tree for all implements that enhanced human comfort. And we continue to take trees. We take old trees, fossil trees out of the earth, and we burn them, and it's an even worse situation. But what did Mahavira invoke his disciples to do? He said, regard the tree, let the tree be, appreciate the tree. Do not see the tree as a source of fuel. Do not see the tree for the pail that can be crafted for it. Do not see the tree as a potential wheel, but see the tree as an integral life form, and live only with what you need. And in my practice as a teenager in yoga, one of the sadhanas given by my beloved teacher, Anjali Inti, was to make a list every day of the week for the week of practicing aparigraha. And even though I was a teenager, I was a college student, I didn't have a whole lot of stuff. Every day, I would fill a sheet of paper with the titles of the books, with the implements in my little kitchen, with the clothing in my wardrobe, and so much, so much, so much. And we can see the wisdom of the Digambara sadhu, who owns nothing but the lotal and receives food sustenance once a day into hand, directly into mouth. And how far we have come, how much harm we have caused by all of these human comforts that we now deem to be so necessary. The beauty of the shutdown worldwide is that we're regaining an intimacy with our kitchen. We're regaining an intimacy by stretching out our wardrobe. We're regaining an intimacy with the bare necessities of life. And it's this knowledge that will be our salvation, both as a people and as a spirit. How much do we need? We need actually very little. Now, these ethics, so supreme, led to an agreed upon lifestyle, a lifestyle of both these ethics, the yamas and the niyamas, and this practice that was called out by the Buddhists from earlier traditions and lifted up and praised by the Jains as well. And it's called the Brahma Vihara. And the go-to place for every person of yoga is to spontaneously, in the presence of like-minded people, in the presence of people who share a vision and a desire for goodness, to cultivate Maitri, the name of a very famous Upanishad, one of the earliest Upanishads to delineate yoga, to cultivate that open heart, that loving heart. And then, if you're in the company of people ensconced in dukkha, the dukkha propelled by the samsara of the vasana and the samskaras of the kleshas, and for those people, rather than just casting judgment, you develop in your heart karuna. You develop a compassion, the compassion that we have witnessed worldwide as we saw the death of George Floyd. people's hearts broke open, and by the millions they spilled upon the streets, and are still on the streets saying, as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. This happened to Mahatma Gandhi when he traveled from South Africa and saw the ravages of British-imposed famine due to bad economic policy, and his heart broke open. And he said, how can I take these vows? How can I live in a world that suffers so much without reaching out to lend a hand? And then a little bit more personal and psychological, the vow of what do we do with punya? What do we do with people that are better than we are? What do we do with people that seemingly have more gifts than we have? And the Brahma Vihara for this circumstance is to celebrate them with mudita, pramodha, celebrate them with sympathetic joy. Good for you, rather than going into that harmful psychological space of comparing and saying, oh, I wish I had that, going into the space of envy or jealousy, but going into the space of sympathetic joy. And then finally, in Christian theology, it's the problem of theodicy. What do we do in the face of overwhelming evil? What do we do in order to overcome racism and discrimination? What do we do to overcome the greed that causes not only the chopping down of the trees, but the pulling up from the bowels of the earth, the old trees, and burning them, disrupting our very climate? What do? We have to find what the Buddha called upekkha in Pali. We have to find what in Sanskrit is called upeksha, the even eye, that place of equanimity, so that rather than being reactive and angry, without losing our dignity, from a place of tranquility, we can pull forward all other three as needed. Being in the company, friendly with virtuous, happy people, compassionate for those, sometimes entire groups of people who suffer for no good reason other than human hatred and human greed, so that we can celebrate the goodness that is to be found in so many places around us, and then abidingly move forward, creating, and here I'm going to fast forward to about 1500 years ago in the birth of Tantra. And with Tantra, we see that all of this emplacement could be charted within a mandala. And this mandala provided a yantra, a roadmap for how we would best like to be. And then retrieving perhaps a bit from the recitation of the Vedas. But what the Tantrikas did was that they took this thing called the alphabet, and they sanctified it into a group of bija mantras, and provided a technology for the regulation of the mind through the counting of the breath, from the Satipatthana of Pali literature, the tools of Vipassana, of awareness of body, awareness of breath, awareness of emotions, and awareness of all of the different factors that comprise our existence. To marry that geometry and that breath practice with a mantra practice moving toward visualization. And in visualization, in Buddhist visualization, Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, known as Chenrezig in Tibet, becomes the female goddess of compassion, Kuan Yin, Tara, as Buddhism moves east, to do a visualization practice of seeing that ideal, seeing that vaunted possibility of compassion right at the center of one's forehead, and use this visualization as a way of emulation, that I want to be like that blessed bodhisattva of service to all people. And this, in tantric practice, allows a transformation of that self, that linga, that personality, rather than going to hatred, greed, and delusion, to going into that place of generosity, into that place of compassion, into that place of equipoise. And this combination provides the roadmap for yoga, provides the possibility of the uplift of oneself for the sake of that place, Mother Earth, where we live. That society, that interpersonal relationship, and we've all been called by this virus to live a life of ahimsa, to live a life of truth, to live a life of honesty, to live a life that's proper, and to live a life with acknowledgement of the grandeur of these bare necessities, the Pancha Mahabhuta, linked with our breath, so that we, at least for an instant, can feel disconnection, viyoga, from all of those fettering karmas, and connection, a true yoga, with a sense of our individual swadharma, our individual chaitya, our individual state of awareness. Ancient, relevant, and necessary. Yoga is expressed in Vedic Upanishadic cultures, as expressed in Jain tradition, is expressed by the followers of the Buddha. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chapple. In a few minutes, I think you have given us the history of yoga, but also insights into the philosophy of yoga. And you have also raised some fundamental questions which continue to haunt us today. For instance, what do we do in the face of extreme evil that we see all around us? It's a very difficult question. It's not very easy for people to, follow those great vratas and remain equipoised between dukh and sukh, and have that samata between the two extremes. Perhaps yoga can help us, because what we are seeing today is, yes, you talked about the bare necessities, how little we really need to live. But there's also this question, and if you look around the world, so many of these people, billions upon billions, how little they have to live. So we talked about the resources and the destruction of the forests and the destruction of nature. which of course has led to such phenomena as climate change and its evil effects. Yoga, of course, is necessary, but I think it's also essential that we must be convincing. You see, when people talk about philosophy, sometimes this kind of philosophy, which is of course very deep, very essential, we are all proud of it, that people thought through these things so many years ago. But their practicality and relevance has to be reiterated all the time. And I think Gandhi was one example where he did mention this. Now, today, for instance, it's not just the COVID only. We are also seeing a lot of problems on our borders, and there is a lot of anger and akrosh in the country. And how to remain equipoise and be guided by those great vratas is not very easy for ordinary people. But let me thank you for a very deep lecture that you gave us on the yoga, and I think it will make us think about some of these issues. Now, let me open up this for discussion. We have a few minutes, and I think I can say, let me some questions in the chat box here, and there are many people who are appreciating your talk. Alok Joshi and somebody called Dell, which is, I suppose, a computer. Nandini Sinha Kapoor. Many people are thanking. Yes, Gunjan has a question. So, Gunjan, go ahead. And then Arpita.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and good morning, Dr. Chapple. I have very specific questions, two of them only. One is this whole notion of the linga, which we first read in Ishwar Krishna's Sankhya Karika. And then the whole duality, if you want to call it duality, I don't know what you want to say about the Nama Rupa and the linga, and how it plays out through the whole this karuna and mudita and the practice of yoga. And also, historically speaking, this was obviously from the philosophical standpoint, but historically speaking, how the linga or the whole conception of it transforms, say maybe up to the period of the mandalas, and how from Ishwar Krishna's time to now, it has taken, and it is such a flexible concept that it is adaptable, but yet that one kind of definition which I could not find anywhere in Ishwar Krishna's Sankhya Karika. I was looking for it, and I thought of multiple answers. So could you give me some light on that?
Oh, this is the type of question that makes a scholar's heart soar. And I want to talk about my relationship with the Sankhya Karika. When we were teenagers and we were studying with Anjali, we were also at university. There were about 30 of us that were very earnest in our undertakings of yoga. And one of my senior fellow yoga students, also at university, identified early on the centrality of Sankhya. So we spent an entire year going through karika by karika by karika, and the logic, the premises, and then the bhavas. And our professor had also attuned us to the importance of the bhavas. As you may know, Dr. Yogendra, who established the Yoga Institute in Mumbai, first in Harriman, New York, and then the exclusionary immigration laws went in. So we went back to Mumbai and developed this remarkable place, Hamsaji, still keeping on, his daughter-in-law, after all these more than 100 years. But what his son in his dissertation wrote about was the centrality of the bhavas. And this caught the attention of my professors at Fordham University, who were of Indian origin, one from Kerala, one from Goa. And we also spent a great deal of time teasing apart the 50-part list, which is like an Abhidharma psychology, as well as the more general eightfold list. And every morning I reflect on the reciprocity between Anaishvarya and Aishvarya, between raga and viraga, between jnana and adjnana, which is jnana, of course, is the key to liberation, and then dharma and adharma. And then as we read forward into the Sankhyakarika itself, so I've been keeping with this for many decades now, and then a couple of years ago, we spent a full year returning to the Sankhyakarika, a different group here in Los Angeles, but a Sanskrit group, and we've done a new translation, and this is a forthcoming book. And one of the things that when we did our Yoga Sutra translation, which took us 7 years, what we tried to do was for every Sanskrit term, find, because Patanjali was extremely careful about every syllable in the Yoga Sutra. Every word choice was a purposeful word choice. And we came up with a translation. This is the book. It's called Yoga Luminous, whereas I had also done with the Yoga Sutra, or rather with the Bhagavad Gita, we do an analysis of every single term of the Yoga Sutra. And when we're doing this, and we come up with a consistent English term, and if we can't find a consistent English term, we leave the Sanskrit. And most people have just not been able to work with the word linga in a way that does honor to the various layers of meaning. So now I'm going to fast forward to an experience I had a few weeks ago. And just before the shutdown, the first week of March, I was in Hardwar. And I was in the Gorakhnath temple, some of you know, on Upper Road. And this young Amarnath sadhu guided me in, teenage monk. It was just amazing to see someone take the vows at such a young, tender age. And he brought me into the linga. So your question, Gunjun, is how do we put these things of linga together? And Tantra actually gives the answer. And this particular linga, which I urge you, if you're in Hardwar, able to make pilgrimage and go into, it's actually the cave. You get the sense of the living presence of Gorakhnath having visited that cave. And this particular linga is a place to do Tradakam, and it's a place also so to engage fixed gaze for the Rupa. And it's also a place, and I was sort of surprised, but they invite you to touch the linga, and it looks very much like this. It's a crystal linga, and it is ice cold, and it just brings you to your senses. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful place to meditate. And when I thought of that linga, and I thought of its representation literally of crystalline consciousness, of that pure jewel reflecting that state of samadhi where there's the collapse of difference between subject, object, and the active sensation, that what I said about Tantra, that you emulate to transform. And in this instance, rather than the personhood of Avalokiteshvara and that embodied compassion, that this linga was about the state of samadhi, that state of going into upeksha, that state of going into silence. And how do we get there? By holding all of the samskaras, all of the vasanas in abeyance. So what we came up with in this new translation of the Sankhyakarika, when we translate the word linga, we translate it as personality. because through that experience of jnana, all of those bhavas are held in abeyance. And I want to just lift up my Guruma. She learned her yoga in Calcutta in the 1940s and 50s before coming to the United States as a young woman. And what she would talk about is obeyance. First of all, follow the yamas and niyamas, obeyance. Then she would talk about obeisance, to give honor, to give respect, to give pranam to that ideal which is greater than we are, Ishvara Pranidhana. And then she would talk about abeyance, that through those two, by obeyance and obeisance, we're able to hold all of that fettered, klesha-driven desire, we're able to hold it in abeyance. So this also goes to answering Dr. Arvind's question of what do we do about evil? We fix, we quiet ourselves, and then we do what little we can. So that was question number one. Okay, do you have a second question, Gunjan?
Well,
Short. This is just about how do you relate the urna, the Buddhist urna with this kind of, looking back and non-judgmental view, but yet being interactive with the problem like we have currently at our borders.
Okay, the urna here and also in Jain sculpture at the heart. Okay, we open compassion. And my little understanding of the current conflict is about a road. And there's a very interesting passage from Chuangzi. And Chuangzi is the great Taoist philosopher. And he's almost a proto-Gandhian in that he says, every village has what it needs. Why do we even need a road? Why do we even need to go to the other side of the mountain? We can be happy here. And if we look at the Gandhian analysis of brutal economics at the core of human suffering, we see that this globalization capitalism, where why is China building a road across Pakistan to go to Karachi? Okay, to export more useless plastic goods. Okay, is it about food? Not really. It's about these creature comforts. It's about pulling up those trees, melting them down into polymer, and then having forth with this global trade that we're slowly discovering in this COVID experience. We don't need to burn all that gasoline to go hither and yon. We don't need to go out and buy more clothes to adorn our bodies. We don't need to pile it on, pile it on, pile it on. And of course, I love the earlier question, what do we do about the hungry mouths? Well, Gandhi's solution was create village-based economies, locally sourced sustenance, and then interrogate how much is enough? How much is enough? And I think that's really the cause of conflict on anybody's border, the flow economy. Okay, so.
I think we are running out of time. We are almost run out of time, but let me
Sorry,
take
I
one or
have
two
two questions.
No, wait, I know you have two questions.
I can see them, yeah.
But please, if you can see them, why don't you answer them? So that will save some time.
Yes, I think we can all see them.
Yeah.
What to do in the face of the heartless? Take the cue from the Dalai Lama, which is don't let someone else's heartlessness make you heartless. It's a very, very difficult practice. Second, How can one measure objectively, such as how one needs to survive, given that everybody is, how do we figure out how much we need? This is the question, is the challenge of life. That how do we operationalize these words linked together of obeisance and obeyance and holding things in abeyance. This becomes our living laboratory. This becomes the invitation to what in Jainism, what Jain practice calls us parikrama, to examine the steps, the krama, very carefully and very internally about how can my life emulate the better life? How can my life reduce the harm of consumerism, the harm of judgment? And then slowly from that morning puja place to emerge into that world of interaction so that hopefully our realm of engagement is one that fosters calm and peace rather than exciting and stimulating the grasping aspect of the human that has really gotten us into so much abiding trouble. Great question, and it's the challenge of daily life.
Okay. Now we have one question from Ambassador Basant Gupta. Basant?
Yes. My question is that the Gita talks about moving from mamatva to samatva, from selfish behavior to equanimity of mind. Now we have the wisdom, but very rarely can people follow that wisdom, implement that wisdom. So what's the problem?
This is where the Vishuddhimagga is so instructive. And the Vishuddhimagga is a Buddhist Theravada text that delineates the rhythm of daily practice. And it stabilizes the mind. And what's really at stake with your question is, what do we do with the mind? And it says, stabilize the mind. And this is the topic really of this book that just came out a few weeks ago called Living Landscapes. And it goes through the passages from the Prithvi Sukta, from the Acharanga Sutra, from the Vishuddhimagga, from the Gyanarnava, from the Yoga Vasishta, my so favorite text. And in all of this literature, it says, regard the earth, meditate upon the earth. Do it for 20 minutes. And the Garanda Samhita says, do it for 2.5 hours. And cultivate that intimacy first with earth, then with water, then with fire, with the air, and your location in space. And by making this a daily practice, and this was our training as teenagers in yoga, as she had learned it in Calcutta, we learned it on Long Island. And I find it such an amazing practice to be grounded with the earth, to revel in the life-giving flow of water, to be energized by that internal and external heat of the sun, to appreciate the rhythm of the breath, and to know just my immediate neighborhood. And I think all of you, through your hopeful daily walks, are getting to know your neighborhood a little bit better, but to know the space that we occupy, that this is the beginning point, and from that foundation we go outward, and then we welcome what we can do inward to help those around us? Excellent question. And we have to always ground this in yoga practice.
Okay, I think we have no other question now. I would like to thank Professor Chapple for such an illuminating talk. I think takeaway from for me is that you see evil, but that does not mean that you should become evil. So that is what perhaps all this. Otherwise, there is no need to talk about these things. Otherwise, it's very simple. You eye for an eye, tit for tat, and everything will be fine. Everybody will become blind, and everything will end in some way or the other. All questions will be resolved. But we study yoga, we study philosophy, we study these vratas simply so that we are better human beings. And in the end, I think it helps. We don't have to look at only ourselves, we have to look at the society. If you have people who are following this, and if, as International Yoga Day says, that you raise awareness about it, so I suppose it will have a positive impact on others also. And I think today with the COVID and with the fresh reflections on the world, the nature of the world, ourselves, and everybody is engaged in some kind of reflection of the other. I think it's good to think about these philosophies and take some that suits you, and don't take something that doesn't suit you. But in the end, I think everybody becomes better and perhaps goes to Samatva, which Vasant Gupta talked about. So, Professor Chapel, thank you very much for being with us